Hello, everyone. Give me just a moment. I had planned on doing things a little bit differently. I unfortunately did not get a chance to. Okay, that works. I appreciate tappies. Let me turn that off for this live. There we go. Alright, everyone. How's everyone doing tonight? I hope everyone is having a great night tonight. I am going to be doing bedtime stories with KJ. KJ is me. That is my name. Now, I will be reading book one of the Guardians of Ga'Hoole series. It is called The Capture. Stop it. First part will be the prologue. Thank you for the finger hearts. The world spiraled. The needles of the old fir tree blurred against the night sky, and then there was a sickening sensation as the forest floor raced towards him. Soren madly tried to beat his stubby little wings. Useless, he thought. I am dead, a dead owlet. 3 weeks out of the shell, and my life ends. Suddenly, something began to soften his fall. The pocket of breeze, a cushion of wind, a downy fluff of air, lacing through his unsightly patches of fuzz. What was it? Time slowed. His short life flowed by him, every second of it, from his very first memory. Chapter 1. A Nest Remembered. Noctis, can you spare a bit more down, darling? I think our third little one is about to arrive. That egg is beginning to crack. Not again, sighed Clud. What do you mean, Clud, not again? Do you want another little brother? His father said. There was an edge to his voice. Or sister, his mother sighed with a low, soft whistle barn owls sometimes do. I'd like a sister. Soren peeped up. You just hatched out 2 weeks ago. Clud turned to Soren, his younger brother. What do you know about sisters? Maybe, Soren thought to himself, they would be better than brothers. Clud seemed to have resented him since the moment he had first been hatched. You really wouldn't want them arriving just when you're about to begin branching, Clud said dully. Branching was the first step, literally toward flight. The young owlets would begin by hopping from branch to branch and flapping their wings. Now, Clud, his father admonished. Don't be impatient. There will be time for branching. Remember, you won't have your flight feathers for at least another month or more. Soren was just about to ask what month was it when he heard a crack. The owl family all seemed to freeze. To any other forest creature, the sound would have been imperceivable. But barn owls, they're blessed with extraordinary hearing. It's coming, Soren's mother gasped. I'm so excited. She sighed again and looked rapturously at the pure white egg as it rocked back and forth. A tiny hole appeared, and from it protruded a small spur. It's Eggtooth, by Glocks, Soren's father exclaimed. Mine was bigger, wasn't it, Dad? Clud shoved Soren aside for a better look. Soren crept back up under his father's wing. I don't know, son, but isn't it a pretty, glistening little point? Always gives me a thrill, such a tiny little thing, pecking its way into the big wild world. Ah, bless my gizzard, the wonder of it all. It did indeed seem a wonder. Soren stared at the hole. It now began to split into 2 or 3 cracks. The egg shuddered slightly, and the cracks grew longer and wider. He had done this himself just 2 weeks ago. This was exciting. What happened to my egg tooth, Mom? It dropped off, stupid, Clud said. Oh, Soren said quietly. His parents were so absorbed in the hatching that they didn't reprimand Clud for his rudeness. Where's Mrs. P? Mrs. P, his mother said urgently. Right here, ma'am. Mrs. Plithifer, the old blind snake who had been with the owl family for years and years, slithered into the hollow. Blind snakes born without eyes served as nest maids and were kept by many owls to make sure the nests were clean and free of maggots and various insects that found their way into the hollows. Mrs. P, no maggots or vermin in that corner where Noctis put his fresh down. Course not, ma'am. Now how many broods of owlets have I been through with you? Oh, I'm sorry, Mrs. P. How could I have ever doubted you? I'm always nervous at the hatching. Each one is just like the first time. I never get used to it. Don't you apologize, ma'am. You think any other birds would care 2 whits if their nest was clean? The stories I've heard about seagulls, oh my goodness. Well, I won't even get into it. Blind snakes prided themselves on working for owls, whom they considered the noblest of birds. Meticulous, the blind snakes had great disdain for other birds that they felt were less clean due to their unfortunate digestive processes. That caused them to eliminate only sloppy, wet droppings instead of nice, neat bundles. The pellets that owls yarked or spit up, although owls did digest the soft parts of their food in a manner similar to birds. I lost my spot. There it is. And indeed passed it in a liquid form. For some reason, they were never associated with these lesser digestive processes. All the fur and bones and tiny teeth of their prey, like mice, that could not be digested in the ordinary way, were pressed into little pellets, just the shape and size of the owl's gizzard. Several hours after eating, the owls would yarp them up. Wet poopers is how many nest-made snakes referred to other birds. Of course, Miss Plithifer was much too proper to use such coarse language. Mum, Soren gasped, look at that. The nest suddenly seemed to reverberate with a huge cracking sound. Again, only huge to the ear slits of barn owls. Now the egg split. A pale, slimy blob flopped out. It's a girl! A long shriek called streamed from his mother's throat. It was the shriek of pure happiness. Adorable! Soren's mother sighed. Enchanting, said Soren's father. Clud yawned, and Soren stared dumbfounded at the wet, naked thing, with its huge, bulging eyes sealed tightly shut. What's wrong with her head, Mom? Soren asked. Oh, nothing, dear. Chicks have very large heads. It takes a while for their bodies to catch up. Not to mention their brains, Clud muttered. So they can't hold their heads up right away, said his mother. You were the exact same way. What shall we call the little dear? Soren's father asked. Eglantine, Soren's mother replied immediately. I have always wanted a little Eglantine. Oh, Mom, I love that name, Soren said. He softly repeated the name, then tipped toward the little pulsing mass of white. Eglantine, he whispered softly, and he thought he saw one sealed eye open just a slip, and a tiny voice seemed to say, Hi. Soren loved his little sister immediately. 1 second, Eglantine had been this little quivering little wet blob, and then, minutes later, it seemed as if she had turned into a fluffy white ball of down. She grew stronger, quickly, or so it appeared to Soren. His parents assured him that he, too, had done exactly the same. That evening it was time for her first insect ceremony. Her eyes were fully open, and she was bawling with hunger. Eglantine could hardly make it through her father's "Welcome to Tydo" speech. Little Eglantine, welcome to the forest of Tydo, forest of the Barn Isles, or Tydo Alba, as we are more formally known. Once upon a time, long, long ago, we did indeed live in barns. But now, we and other Tydo cousins live in this forest kingdom known as Tydo. We are rare indeed, and we are perhaps the smallest of all the owl kingdoms, although in truth, it has been a long time since we had a king. Someday when you grow up, when you enter your second year, you too will fly out from this hollow and find one of our own in which to live with a mate. This was the part of the speech that amazed and disturbed Soren. He simply could not imagine growing up and having a nest of his own. He could not be separated from his parents, and yet there was this urge to fly, even now, with his stubby little wings that lacked even the slightest sign of true flight feathers. And now, Soren's father continued, it is time for your first insect ceremony. He turned to Soren's mother. Marella, my dear, can you bring forward the cricket? Soren's mother stepped up. In her beak she held one of the summer's last crickets. Eat up, young'un, head first. Yes, down the beak. Yes, always head first. That's the proper way. Be the cricket, mouse, or vole. Sighed Soren's father as he watched his daughter swallow the cricket. Dizzy in the gizzy, ain't it so? Clud blinked and yawned. Sometimes his parents really embarrassed him, especially his dad, with his stupid jokes. Wit of the wood, muttered Clud. That dawn, after the owls had settled down, Soren was still so excited by his little sister's arrival that he could not sleep. His parents had retired to the ledge above where they slept, but he could hear their voices threading through the dim morning light that filtered into the hollow. Oh, Noctis, it is very strange. Another owlet disappeared. Yes, dear, I'm afraid so. How many is that now in the last few days? 15 missing, I do believe. That is many more than can be accounted for by raccoons. Yes, Noctis replied grimly, and there is something else. What? His wife replied in a lower, wavering hoot. Eggs. Eggs? Eggs have disappeared. Eggs from nests? Yes, I'm afraid so. No. Mariella Abala gasped. I have never heard of such a thing. It's unspeakable. I thought I must tell you in case you are blessed with another brood. Oh, great Glocks, his mother gasped. Soren's eyes blinked wide. He had never heard his mother swear before. But we so seldom leave the nest during broody times. Whoever it is must watch us, she paused. Watch us constantly. Whoever it is can fly or climb, Noctis Alba said darkly. Soren felt a sense of dread seep into the hollow. How thankful he was that Eglantine had not been snatched while just an egg. He vowed he would never leave her alone. It seemed to Soren that as soon as Eglantine ate her first insect, she never stopped eating. His mother and father assured him that he too had been the same. And you still are, Soren. And it's almost time for your first fur on meat ceremony. That was what life was like, those first few weeks in the nest. One ceremony after another. Each, it seemed in some way or another, led to the truly biggest, perhaps the most solemn yet joyous moment in a young owl's life. First flight. Fur, whispered Soren. He couldn't quite imagine what it was like. What it would feel like slipping down his gullet. His mother always stripped off all the fur from the meat and then tore out the bones before offering the little tidbits of fresh mouse or squirrel to Soren. Clud was almost ready for his first bone ceremony when he would be allowed to eat the whole bit, as Soren's father said. And it was just before first bones that a young owl began branching. And just after that, it would begin its first real flight, under the watchful eyes of his parents, of course. Hop, hop. That's it, Clud. Now up, with the wings just as you begin the hop, to that next branch. And remember, you are just branching now, no flying. And even after your first flight lessons, no flying, by yourself until Mom and I say so. Yes, Dad, Clud said with a bored voice. Then he muttered, how many times have I heard this lecture? Soren had heard it many, many times. Even though he was nowhere near branching, the worst thing a young owl could do was try to fly before it was ready. And of course, young owls usually did this when their parents were out hunting. It was so tempting to try one's newly fledged wings. But it would most likely end in a disastrous crash, leaving the little owlet nestless, perhaps badly injured, and on the ground, exposed to dangerous predators. The lecture was brief this time, and the branching lesson resumed. Crisply, crisply, boy, keep the noise down. Owls are silent flyers. But I'm not flying yet, Dad. As you keep reminding me constantly, what's it matter if I'm noisy now when I'm just branching? It's a bad habit. Leads to noisy flight. Hard to outgrow noise habits. Started in branching. Oh, brother. Oh, I'll brother you. Noctis exploded and gave his son a cuff on the head and then nearly tipped him over. Soren had to admit that Clud didn't even whimper, just as he picked himself up. and gave his dad a glaring look, and resumed hopping, slightly less noisily than before. There was a series of soft, short hisses from Miss Pliffler. Difficult one, that one. My. Glad your mom's not here to see this, Eglantine. Miss Pliffler called out suddenly, even though she was blind. She seemed to know exactly what the young owlets were doing at any given moment. She now heard the crunch of a nest bug in Eglantine's beak. Put that nest bug down. Owls do not eat nest bugs. That's what house snakes do. If you keep it up, you'll just grow fat and squishy. You won't be prepared for your first meat ceremony. And then, no first fur. And then, no first bones. And then well, you know what. Now your mom is just out looking for a nice chubby vole with soft fur for Soren's first fur ceremony. And she might even find a nice wriggly little centipede for you. Oh, they're so much fun to eat, Soren exclaimed, all their little legs pittering down your gullet. Oh, Soren, tell me that story about the first time you ate a centipede, Eglantine begged. Miss Plissifer sighed softly. It was so sweet. Eglantine hung on every word of Soren's. Truly sisterly love. And Soren loved her right back. She wasn't sure what exactly had happened with the older brother, Clud. There was always one difficult one in the brood. But Clud was more than just difficult. There was something Miss Plissifer thought hard. Just something missing with Clud. Something rather unnatural, unowlish. Sing the centipede song, Soren. Sing it. Soren opened his beak wide and began to sing. What gives a wriggle? What makes you jiggle when you eat them? Whose weensy little feet make my heart really beat? Why is it those little creepy crawlies that make me feel so jolly? For the darling centipede, my favorite buggy feed. I always want some more. That's the insects I adore. More than beetles, more than crickets, which at times give me the hiccups. I crave only to feed on a juicy centipede, and I shall be happy forevermore. Just as Soren finished the song, his mother flew into the hollow and dropped the bowl at their feet. A nice fat one, my dear, enough for your first fur ceremony, and Clud's first bones. I want my own, Clud said. Nonsense, dear. You could never eat a whole vole. Whole vole, squeaked Eglantine. Oh, Mom, it rhymes. I love rhymes. I want one all for myself, Clud persisted. Now look here, Clud. Mariella fixed her son in a dark, steady gaze. We do not waste food around here. This is a very large bowl. There is enough for you to have your first bone ceremony, Soren to have his first fur ceremony, and Eglantine to have her first meat. Meat? I get to eat meat? Eglantine gave a little hop of excitement. She seemed to have forgotten all about the joys of centipedes. And so, Clud, when you want a whole vole all your own, you can just go out and hunt it for yourself. I spent most of the night tracking down this one. Food is scarce in Tydo this time of year. I'm exhausted. A huge orange moon sailed in the autumn sky. It seemed to hover just above the great fir tree, where Soren and his family lived, and it cast a soft glow in through the opening of the hollow. It was indeed a perfect night for the ceremonies that these owls loved, and that marked their growth.
Passage of time. And so that night, just before the dawn, the three little owlets had their first meet, first fur, and first bone ceremony. And Clud yarked his first real pellet. It was the exact shape of his gizzard, which had pressed it into a tight little bundle of bones and fur. "Oh, that's a fine pellet, son," Clud's father muttered. "Yes, indeed," his mother agreed. "Quite admirable." And Clud for once seemed satisfied, and Miss Plithifer thought privately to herself how no bird could be really bad that had such a noble digestive system. That night, from the time the big orange moon began to slip down in the sky until the first gray streaks of the new dawn, Noctis Alba told the stories that owls had loved to hear from the time of Glox. Glox was the most ancient order of owls, from which all other owls descended. So his father began. Once upon a very long time ago, in a time of Glox, there was an order of nightly owls from a kingdom called Gehul, and who would rise each night into the blackness to perform noble deeds. They spoke no words, but true ones. Their purpose was to right all wrongs, to make the strong the weak, mend the broken, and vanquish the proud, make powerless those who abused the frail. With hearts sublime, they would take flight. Clud yawned. "Is this a true story or what, Dad?" "It's a legend, Clud," his father answered. "But is it true? I only like true stories." "A legend, Clud, is a story you begin to feel in your gizzard, and then over time it becomes true in your heart, and perhaps makes you become a better owl." Chapter 2. A Life Worth 2 Pellets. Give me just a moment. I will start reading. I need a drink. Welcome in, everyone. I hope y'all are having a great night. Alright. Back to reading. Chapter 2. A Life Worth 2 Pellets. True in your heart. Those words in the deep, throaty hoot of his father were perhaps the last thing Soren remembered before he landed with a soft thud on a pile of moss. Shaking himself and feeling a bit dazed, he tried to stand up. Nothing seemed broken, but how had this happened? He certainly had not tried flying while his parents were out hunting. Good Glox! He hadn't even tried branching yet. He was still far from flight readiness, as his mom called it. So how had this happened? All he knew was one moment he was near the edge of the hollow, peering out, looking for his mom and dad to come home from hunting, and the next minute he was tumbling through the air. Soren tipped his head up. The fir tree was so tall, and he knew that their hollow was near the very top. What had his father said? 90 feet? 100 feet? But numbers had no meaning to Soren. Not only could he not fly, he couldn't count. Didn't really know his numbers yet. But there was one thing that he did know. He was in trouble. Deep, frightening, horrifying trouble. The boring lectures that Clud had complained about came rushing back to him. The weight of the terrible truth now pressed upon him in the darkness of the forest. Those grim words, an owlet that is separated from his parents before it has learned to fly and hunt cannot survive. And Soren's parents were gone on a long hunting flight. They had been many since Eglantine hatched out, but they needed more food, for winter was coming. So right now Soren was completely alone. He could not imagine being more completely alone as he gazed up at the tree that seemed to vanish into the clouds. He sighed and muttered, "So alone, so alone." And yet deep inside him something flickered like a tiny smoldering spark of hope. When he had fallen, he must have done something with his nearly bald wings that kinda captured the air, as his father would say. He tried now to recall that feeling. For a brief instant, falling had actually felt wonderful. Could he perhaps recapture that air? He tried to lift his wings and flutter them slightly. Nothing. His wings felt cold and bare in the crisp autumn breeze. He looked at the tree again. Could he climb, using his talons and beak? He had to do something fast, or he would become some creature's next meal. A rat, a raccoon. Soren felt faint at the slightest thought of a raccoon. He had seen them from the nest, bushy, masked, horrible creatures with sharp teeth. He must listen carefully. He must turn and tip his head as his parents had taught him. His parents could listen so carefully that from high above in their tree hollow, they could hear the heartbeat of a mouse on the forest floor below. Surely he should be able to hear a raccoon. He cocked his head and nearly jumped. He did hear a sound. It was a small, raspy, familiar voice from high up in the fir tree. "Soren? Soren!" It called from the hollow where his brother and sister still nestled in the fluffy pure white down that their parents had plucked from beneath their flight feathers. But it was neither Clud nor Eglantine. "Miss Plithifer?" Soren cried. "Soren, are you alive?" "Oh dear, of course you are. If you can say my name. How stupid of me. Are you well? Did you break anything?" "I don't think so. But how will I ever get back up there?" Oh dear, Miss Plithifer moaned. She was not much good in a crisis. One could not expect such things of nestmaids, Soren supposed. "How long until Mom and Dad get back?" Soren called up. "Oh, it could be a long while, dearie." Soren had hop-stepped to the roots of the tree that ran above the ground like gnarled talons. He could now see Miss Plithifer, her small head with its glistening rosy scales hovering over the edge of the hollow. Where Miss Plithifer's eyes would have been, there were two small indentations. "This is simply beyond me," she sighed. "Is Clud awake? Maybe he could help me." There was a long pause before Miss Plithifer answered weakly. "Well, perhaps." She sounded hesitant. Soren could hear her now, nudging Clud. "Don't be grumpy, Clud. Your brother has taken a tumble, as it were." Soren heard his brother's yawn. "Oh my." Clud sighed and didn't sound especially upset. Soren thought soon the large head of his brother would be peering over the edge of the hollow. His white, heart-shaped face with the immense dark eyes peered down on Soren. "I say," Clud drawled, "you've gotten yourself in a terrible fix." "I know, Clud. Can you help me? You know more about flying than I do. Can you teach me?" "Me? Teach you? I wouldn't know where to begin. Have you gone yokes?" He laughed. "Stark, raving yokes. Me teach you." He laughed again. There was a sneer embedded deep within his laugh. "I'm not yokes, but you're always telling me much you know, Clud." This was certainly the truth. Clud had been bragging about his superiority ever since Soren had hatched out. He should get the favorite spot in the hollow because he was already losing his downy fluff in preparation for his flight feathers, and therefore would be colder. He deserved the largest hunks of mouse meat because he, after all, was on the brink of flying. "You've already had your first flight ceremony. Tell me how to fly, Clud." "One cannot tell another how to fly. It's a feeling. And besides, it is really a job for Mom and Dad. It would be very impertinent of me to usurp their position." Soren had no idea what usurp meant. Clud often used big words to impress him. "What are you talking about? Usurp?" Sounded like yarp to Soren. But what would yarping have to do with teaching him to fly? Time was running out. The light was leaking out of the day's end, and the evening shadows were falling. The raccoons would soon be out. "I can't do it, Soren," Clud replied in a very serious voice. "It would be extremely improper for a young owlet like myself to assume this role in your life. My life isn't going to be worth 2 pellets if you don't do something. Don't you think it's improper for you to let me die? What will Mom and Dad say to that?" "I think they will understand completely." Great Glocks, understand completely? He had to be yokes. Soren was simply too dumbfounded. He could not say another word. "I'm going to get help, Soren. I'll go to Hilda's." He heard Mrs. P rasp. Hilda was another nest-made snake for an owl family in a tree near the banks of the river. "I wouldn't if I were you, P." Clud's voice was ominous. It made Soren's gizzard absolutely quiver. "Don't call me P. That's rude." "Oh, that's the last thing you have to worry about, P. Me being rude." Soren blinked. "I'm going, Clud. You can't stop me," Miss Plithifer said firmly. "Can't I?" Soren heard a rustling above. Good Glocks, what was happening? "Miss Plithifer!" Only silence now. "Miss Plithifer?" Soren called again. Maybe she had gone to Hilda's. He could only hope and wait. It was nearly dark now, and a chill wind rose up. There was no sign of Miss Plithifer returning. First teeth. Isn't that what Dad always called those early cold winds? The first teeth of winter? The very words made poor Soren shudder. When his father had first used this expression, Soren had no idea what teeth even were. His father explained what they were, something that owls didn't have, but most other animals did, and they were for tearing and chewing food. "Does Miss Plithifer have them?" asked Soren. Miss Plithifer gasped in disgust. His mother said, "Of course not, dear." "Well, what are they exactly?" Soren had asked. His mother thought for just a moment. Just imagine a mouthful of beaks. Yes, very sharp beaks. Well, that sounds scary, Mother. Yes, it can be. His mother replied, that is why you do not want to fall out of the hollow or try to fly.
Because raccoons have very sharp teeth. You see, his father broke in, we have no need for such things as teeth. Our gizzards take care of all that chewing business. I find it rather revolting, the notion of actually chewing something in one's mouth. They say it adds flavor, darling, his mother added. I get flavor, plenty of flavor, in my gizzard. Where do you think that old expression, I know it in my gizzard, comes from? Or, I have a feeling in my gizzard, Mariella? Noctis. I'm not sure if that's the same thing as flavor. That mouse we had for dinner last night. I can tell you from my gizzard exactly where it had been. He had been feasting on the sweet grass of the meadow mixed in the nudie of this little gahul tree that grows down by the stream. Great glocks, I don't need teeth to taste. Oh dear, thought Soren, he might never hear this gentle bickering between his parents again. A centipede pittered by Soren. Didn't even care. Darkness gathered, the black of night deeper, and from the down on the ground he could barely see the stars. This, perhaps, was the worst. He could not see the sky through the thickness of the trees. How could he miss the hollow from their nest? There was always a little piece of the sky to watch. At night it sparkled with stars or raced with clouds. In the daytime there was often a lovely patch of blue, and sometimes toward evening, before twilight, the clouds turned bright orange or pink. There was an odd smell down here on the ground, damp, moldy. The wind sighed through the branches above, through the leaves and the needles of the forest floor, but down on the ground, well, the wind didn't even seem to touch the ground. There was a terrible stillness. It was the stillness of a windless place. This was no place for an owl to be. Everything was different. In his feathers had been even half-fledged. He could have plumped them up, and the downy fluff beneath the flight feathers would have kept him warm. He supposed he could try calling for Eglantine, but what would she use? She was so young. Besides, if he called out, wouldn't that alert other creatures in the forest that he was there? Creatures with teeth? He guessed his life wasn't worth 2 pellets, but even worthless, he still missed his parents. He missed them so much that the missing felt sharp. Yes, he did feel something in his gizzard, as sharp as a tooth. Getting a drink. Give me a moment. All right. Chapter 3. Snatched. Soren was dreaming of teeth, and out of the heartbeats of mice when he heard the first soft rustlings overhead. Mom? Dad? He cried out in his half-sleep. He would forever regret calling out those two words, for suddenly the night was ripped with a shrill screech, and Soren felt talons wrap around him. Now he was being lifted, and they were flying very fast, faster than he could think, faster than he could ever imagine. His parents never flew this fast. He had watched them when they took off or came back to the hollow. They glided slowly and rose beautifully lazy spirals into the night. But now, underneath, the earth raced by. Slivers of air blistered his skin. The moon rolled out from behind thick clouds and bleached the world with an eerie whiteness. He scoured the land. Below for the tree that had been his home, but the trees blurred into clumps, and then the forest of the kingdom of Tyto seemed to grow smaller and smaller, dimmer and dimmer in the night, until Soren could not stand to look down anymore, so he dared to look up. There was a great business of feathers on the owl's legs. His eyes continued upward. This was a very huge owl. Or was it even an owl? Atop this creature's head, over each eye, were two tufts of feathers that looked like an extra set of wings. Just as Orn was thinking that this is the strangest owl he ever seen, the owl blinked and looked down. Yellow eyes. He'd never seen such eyes. His own parents and his brother and sister all had dark, almost black eyes. His parents' friends who occasionally flew by had brownish eyes, perhaps some with a tinge of tawny gold. But yellow eyes? This was wrong. Very wrong. Surprised, the owl blinked. Soren could not speak, so the owl continued. Yes, you see, that's the problem with the king of Tyto. You never see any other kind of owl but your own kind. Lowly, undistinguished barn owls. That's not true, said Soren. You dare contradict me, screeched the owl. I've seen grass owls and masked owls. I've seen bay owls and sooty owls. Some of my parents' very best friends are grass owls. Stupid. They're all Tytos. The owl barked at him. Stupid? Grown-ups weren't supposed to speak this way. Not to young owls. Especially not to chicks. It was mean. Soren decided that he should be quiet. He would stop looking up. What might have a haggard here? He heard the owl say. Soren turned his head slightly to see who the owl was speaking to. Oh, great Glocks. One wonders if it's the worth of effort. The owl's eyes seemed more brown than yellow, and his feathers were spattered with splotches of white, gray and brown. Oh, I think it was always worth the effort, Grimble. And don't let Sporn hear you talking that way. You'll get a demerit, and then we'll all be forced to attend another one of his interminable lectures on attitude. This owl looked different as well, not nearly as big as the other owl, and his voice made a soft ting-ting sound. It was at least a minute before Soren noticed that this owl was also carrying something in his talons. It was a creature of some sort. It looked rather owlish, but it was so small, hardly larger than a mouse. Then it blinked its eyes. Yellow. Soren resisted the urge to yark. Don't say a word. The small owl said in a squeaky whisper, Wait. Wait for what? Soren wondered, but soon he felt the night stir with the beating of other wings. More owls fell in beside them. Each one carried an owlet in his talons. There was a low hum from the owls that gripped Soren. Gradually, the other owls flanking them joined in. Soon the air thrummed with a strange music. "It's their hymn," whispered the tiny owl. "It gets louder. That's when we can talk." Soren listened to the hymn. "Hail to St. Angelo's, our alma mater. Hail our song we raise in praise of thee. Long in the memory of every loyal owl, thy splendid banner emblazon me. Now to thy golden talons homage we're bringing, guiding symbol of our hopes and fears. Hope to the cries of eternal praises, ringing long may we triumph in the coming years." The tiny owl began to speak as the voices swelled in the black of the night. "My first words of advice are to listen rather than speak. You've already got yourself marked as a wild owl, a haggard. Who are you? What are you? Why do you have yellow eyes? You see what I mean? That's the last thing you should worry about." The tiny owl sighed softly. "But I'll tell you. I'm an elf owl. My name is Gylfie. I've never seen one of you in Tydo. We live in the high desert kingdoms in Kunir. Do you ever get any bigger?" "No, this is it. But you're so small. You've got all your feathers. Or almost." "Yes, it's the worst part. It was within a week or so of flying when I got snatched. But how old are you?" 20 nights. 20 nights? How can you fly that young?" Elf owls are able to fly by 27 or 30 nights. "How much is 66 nights?" Soren asked. "A lot. I'm a barn owl, and we can't fly for 66 nights." "But what happened to you? How did you get snatched?" Gylfie did not answer right away. Then slowly, "What is the one thing your parents always tell you not to do?" "Fly before you're ready," Soren said. "I tried, and I fell." "But I don't understand. It would have been only a week, you said." Soren, of course, wasn't sure how long a week was or how long 27 nights were. But it all sounded shorter than 66. "I was impatient. I was well on my way to growing feathers, but had grown no patience." Gylfie paused again. "But what about yourself? You must have tried it too." "No, I don't really know what happened. I just fell out of the nest." But the second Soren said those words, he felt a weird queasiness. He almost knew. He couldn't quite remember, but he almost knew how it happened. And he felt a mixture of dread and shame creep through him. He felt something terrible deep in his gizzard. Another drink before chapter 4. Yes, elf owl. His name is Gylfie. And Grimble and the other owl are great horned owls. Soren is a barn owl. Thank you for the tappy taps, Owl. I know you do. I love this series. The series is awesome. All right. And these books really ain't that bad to read. All right. Chapter 4. St. Angelou's Academy for Orphaned Owls. The owls began to bank up in steep turns as they circled downward. Soren blinked and looked down. That wasn't a tree, not a stream, not a meadow. Instead, immense rock needles bristled up, and cutting through them were deep stone ravines and jagged canyons. This could not be Tyto. That was all Soren could think. Down, 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 they plunged in tighter and tighter circles, until they slided on the stony floor of a deep, narrow canyon. And although Soren could indeed see the sky from which they had just plunged, it seemed further away than ever. Above, there was a sound of wind, distant yet shrill, as it whistled across the upper reaches of this harsh stone world. Then, piercing through the shriek of the wind, came a voice, even louder and sharper. Welcome, owlets. Welcome to St. Angelou's. This is your new home. It is here that you will find truth and purpose. Yes, that is our motto. When truth is found, purpose is revealed. The immense, ragged owl was a great horned owl, fixed in her yellow gaze. The tufts above her eyes swooped up. The shoulder feathers on her left wing had separated, revealing an unsightly patch of skin with a jagged white scar. She was pierced on a rock outcropping in the granite ravine where they had been brought. I am Skinch, Abla General of St. Angelou. My job is to teach you the truth. We discourage questions here, as we feel they often distract from the truth. Soren found this very confusing. He had always asked questions, even since he had hatched out. Skinch, the Abla General, was continuing her speech. You are orphans now. The word shocked Soren. He was not an orphan. He had a mom. He had a dad. Perhaps they were not here, but they were somewhere. Orphan meant your parents were dead. How dare this Skinch, the blah blah blah, or whatever she called herself, say he was an orphan. We have rescued you. It is here at St. Aggie's that you shall find everything that you need to become humble, plain servants of a higher good. This was the most outrageous thing Soren had ever heard. He hadn't been rescued. He had been snatched away. If he had been rescued, these owls would have flown up and dropped him back in his family's nest. And what exactly was a higher good? There are many ways in which you can serve the higher good. It is our job to find out which best suits you and to discover what your special talents are. Skinch narrowed her eyes until they were gleaming embers, slits with her feathery face. I am sure each of you has something special. At that very moment, there was a chorus of hoots, and many owl voices were raised in song. To find one's special quality, one must lead a life of deep humility. To serve in this way, never question but obey. is the blessing of St. Aggie's charity. As the conclusion of the short song, Skinch, the Obla General, swooped down from her stone perch. She fixed them all in the glare of her eyes. You are embarking on an inciting adventure, little orphans. After I have dismissed you, you shall be led, one of 4 glossodoms, where 2 things shall occur. You shall receive your number destination, and you shall also receive your first lesson in the proper manner in which to sleep, and shall be inducted into the march of sleep. These are the first steps towards the specialness ceremony. What in the world was this owl talking about? Soren wondered. Number destination? What was a glossodium? And since when did an owl have to be taught to sleep? And a sleep march? What was that even? It was still night. What owl sleeps at night? But before he could really ponder these questions, he felt himself being gently shoved into a line. A separate line from the little elf owl called Gilfy. He turned his head nearly completely around to search for Gilfy. He caught sight of her. He raised his stubby wing to wave, but Gilfy didn't see him. He saw her marching ahead with her eyes looking straight forward. The line Soren was in wound its way through a series of deep gorges. It was like a stone maze of tangled trails. Through the gaps and canyons and notches of this place called St. Angelo Academy for Orphaned Owls, Soren had the unsettling feeling that he might never see the little elf owl again. And even worse, it would be impossible to ever find one's way out. These stone boxes into a forest world of Tydo, with its immense trees and sparkling streams. They finally came to a stop in a circular stone pit. A white owl with very thick feathers waddled towards them and blinked. Her eyes had a soft yellow glow. I am Finny, your pit guardian. And then she giggled softly. Some of you have been known to call me their pit angel. She gazed sweetly at all of them. I would love it if you would all call me Auntie. Auntie? Soren wondered. Why would I ever call you Auntie? But he remembered not to ask. I must, of course, call you by your number, destination, which you shall shortly be told, said Finny. Oh, goody! A little spotted owl standing next to Soren hopped up and down. This time Soren remembered too late that questions were discouraged. Why do you want a number instead of your name? Hortense! You wouldn't like that name either, the spotted owl whispered. Now shush. Remember, no questions. You shall, of course, Finny continued, if you are good, humble owlets and learn the lessons of humility and obedience. Earn your specialness rank and then receive your true name. But my true name is Soren. It was the name my parents gave me. These words pounded in Soren's head, and even gizzards seemed to tremble in protest. Now, let's line up for our number ceremony, and I have a tempting little snack here for you. These were perhaps 20 owls in Soren's group, and Soren was towards the middle of the line. He watched as the white owl, Auntie or Finny, whom Hortense had informed him was a snowy owl, dropped a piece of fur-stripped mouse meat on the stone before each owl in turn, and then said, "Why, your number is 12-6. What a nice number that is." Every number was either nice, or dear, or darling. Finny bent her head solicitously, and even gave a friendly little pat to the owlet just numbered. She was full of quips and little jokes. Soren was just beginning to feel that things perhaps could be worse, and he hoped that little Gelfie had such a nice owl for a pit guardian. When the huge fierce owl with the tufts over each eye, the very one who had snatched him and called him stupid, alighted down next to Finny, Soren felt a cold dread steal over his gizzard as he saw the owl look directly at him, and then dip his head and whisper something into Finny's ear. Finny nodded, looked at him blandly. They were talking about him, Soren was sure. He could barely move his talons forward on the hard stone toward Finny. His turn was coming up soon. Only 4 more owls before he would be numbered. "Hello, sweetness," Finny cooed as Soren stepped forward. "I have a very special number for you." Soren was silent. Finny continued, "Don't you want to know what it is? This is a trick. Questions are discouraged. I'm not supposed to ask." And that was exactly what Soren said. "I'm not supposed to ask." The soft yellow glow streamed from Finny's eyes. Soren felt a moment's confusion. Then Finny leaned forward and whispered to him, "You know, dear, I'm not as strict as some. So please, if you really, really need to ask a question, ask. But remember to keep your voice down. And here, dear, is a little extra piece of mouse. And your number?" She sighed, and her entire white face seemed to glow with the yellow light. "My favorite, 12-1. Isn't it sublime? It's a very special number, and I'm sure that you will discover your own specialness as an owl." "Thank you," Soren said, still slightly mystified by but a little relieved that the fierce owl had apparently not told Finny anything bad about him. "Thank you what?" Finny giggled. "See, I get to ask questions, too, sometimes." "Thank you, Finny?" Finny inclined her head towards him again. There was a slight glare in her yellow eyes. "Again," she whispered softly. "Again. Now look in my eyes." Soren looked into the yellow light. "Thank you, Auntie." "Yes, dear. I'm just an old broody. Love being called Auntie." Soren did not know what a broody was, but he took the mouse meat and followed the owl who had been in front of him into the glossidium. 2 large ragged brown owls escorted the entire group. The glossidium was a deep box canyon, the floor of which was covered with sleeping owlets. Moonlight streamed down directly on them, silvering their feathers. "Fall in, you two," barked a voice from high up in a rocky crevice. "You!" A plump owl stepped up to Soren. Indeed, Soren's heart quickened at first, for it was another barn owl, just like his own family. There was a white heart-shaped face and the familiar dark eyes, and yet, although the color of these eyes were identical to his own, and to those of his family, he found the owl's gaze frightening. back row, and prepare to assume the sleeping position. These instructions were delivered in the throaty rasp common to barn owls. Soren found nothing comforting in the familiar. The two owls had escorted the newly arrived orphans, spoke to them next. They were long-eared owls and had tufts that poked straight up over their eyes, and they twitched. Soren found this especially unnerving. They each alternated speaking in short, deep hoos. The hoos were even more disturbing than the barks of a skink earlier, even, for the sound seemed to coil into Soren's very breast and thrum with a terrible clang. "I am Jack," the first owl. "I was once a number, but now I have earned a new name." "Who?" Soren snapped off the word. "I see a question forming in your disgusting beak, number 12-1. The who thrummed so deep within Soren's breast that he thought his heart might burst. "Let me make this perfectly clear." The thrumming of the owl's sound was almost unbearable. At St. Aggie's, such words beginning with the sound are not to be spoken. Such words are question words, a habit of mental luxury and indulgence. Questions might fatten the imagination, but they starve the owlish instincts of hardness, patience, humility, and self-denial. We are not here to pamper you by allowing you an orgy of words, question words. They are dirty words, swear words, punishable by the most severe means at our disposal. Jack blinked and cast his gaze on Soren's wings. "We are here to make true owls out of you, and someday you will thank us for it." Soren thought he was going to faint with fear. These owls were so different from Finney. He slightly corrected himself. Jack had resumed speaking in his normal hoo. "Now, my brother shall address you." It was an identical voice. "I am Juk. I, too, was once a number, but I have earned my new name. You are now in the sleeping position, standing tall, heads up, beak tipped to the moon. You see in this glossidium hundreds of owlets. They all have learned to sleep in this manner. You, too, shall learn." Soren looked around, desperately searching for Gylfi, but all he saw was Hortense, or number 12-8. She had assumed the perfect sleeping position. She had assumed the perfect sleeping position. He could tell by the stillness of her head that she was sound asleep. Under the glare of a full moon, Soren spotted a stone arch that connected to what he thought was another glossidium. A mass of owls seemed to be marching. Their beaks were bobbing open and shut, but Soren could not hear what they were saying. Jack now spoke again. "It is strictly forbidden to sleep with the head tucked under the wings, dipped downward the breast, or in the manner that many of you young owls are accustomed to, which is the semi-twist position in which the head rests on the back." Soren felt at least 7 sounds die mutely in his throat. Incorrect sleeping posture is also punishable. using our most severe methods. Sleep correction monitors patrol the Glossidium, making their rounds at regular intervals, Juck continued. Now it was Jat's turn again. Their time seemed perfect. Soren felt they had given this speech many times. Also, at regular intervals, you shall hear the alarm. At the sound, all owlets in the Glossidium are required to begin the sleep march. During the sleep march, Jut resumed, you march, repeating your old name over and over and over again. When the second alarm sounds, you halt where you are. Repeat your numbered destination one time, and one time only, and assume the sleep position once more. Both owls never spoke at once. In an awesome thrum, now sleep. Soren tried to sleep. He really did try. Maybe Finny, he meant Auntie, would believe him. But there was just something in his gizzard, a little twinge, that seemed to make sleep impossible. It was almost as if the shine of a full moon that sprayed its light over half of the Glossidium became a sharp silver needle stabbing through his skull, going straight through to his gizzard. Perhaps he had a very sensitive gizzard, like his dad. But in this case, he wasn't tasting the sweet grass of the meadow mouse he just feasted on. He was tasting dread. Soren was not sure how long it was before the alarm sounded, but it was soon time for his first sleep march. Repeating his name over and over, he followed the owls in his group and now moved into the shadow of the overhang of the arch. Ah, Soren sighed. The stabbing feeling in his skull ceased. His gizzard grew still, and Soren became more alert. The proper state for an owl who lived in the night. He looked about him. A little spotted owl named Hortense stood next to him. Hortense, Soren said. She stared at him blankly and began tapping her feet as if to move. A sleep monitor swooped down. What you marching in place for, 12-8? Assume the sleeping position. Hortense immediately tipped her beak up, her head slightly back, but there was no moon to shine down upon in the shadow of the rock. Soren, also in the sleep position, slid his eyes toward her. Curious, he thought. She responded to her number name, but not her old name, except to move her feet. Still unable to sleep in this new-fangled position, Soren twisted his head about to survey the stone arch. Through the other side of the arch, he caught a glimpse of the sight of Gylfi, but far too late. The alarm sounded, a high-piercing shriek. Before he knew it, he was being pushed along as thousands of owls began to move. Within seconds, there was an unbelievable babble as each owl repeated its old name over and over again. It became clear to Soren that they were following the path of the moon around the Glossidium. They were, however, so many owls that they could not all be herded under the full shine of the moon at the same time. Therefore, some were allowed an interval under an overhang of the rock arch. Perhaps he and Gylfi said they had wound up before at the arch at the same time. Could meet there again. He was determined to get close to Gylfi next time. But that would take 3 more times. 3 more times of blathering his name into the moonlit night. 3 more times of feeling the terrible twinge of his dizziness. 12-1, tip that beak up. It was the sleep monitor. He felt a thwack to the side of his head. Hortense was still next to him. She mumbled, 12-8. What a lovely name that is. 12-8. Perfect name. I love 2s, 4s, and 8s. So smooth. Hortense, Soren whispered softly. Her talons might have just vaguely begun to stir on the floor. But other than that, nothing. Horty. He tried, but the little spotted owl was lost in some dreamless sleep. Finally, Soren was back under the arch and quickly moved over to the other side, which connected to the neighboring glossodeum. The sleep monitors had just barked out the command, now sleep. Suddenly, Gylfi was there. The tiny elf owl swung her head toward Soren. They're moon blinking us, she whispered. Drink before the next chapter. I hope everybody is enjoying the story so far. If you are here and already asleep, that is perfectly fine. I appreciate you being here. Get a couple hits. Yes, hearts hooty hoo. These books are about you. Alright. Chapter 5. Moon Blinking. What? It felt so good to say a fluff sound that Soren almost missed the answer. Didn't your parents tell you about the dangers of sleeping under a full shine? What is full shine? When did you hatch out? 3 weeks ago, I think, or so my parents told me. But again, Soren was not sure what a week was. Ah, that explained it. And in Tydo, there are great trees, right? Gylfi asked. Oh yes, many, and thick with beautiful fir needles and spruce cones, the leaves that turn golden and red. Again, Soren wasn't sure about leaves turning, for he had never seen them. Anything but golden and red. But his parents had told him that once they were green, in a time called summer and spring. Clud had hatched out near the end of the green time. Well, you see, I hatched out more than 3 weeks ago. They spoke softly, so softly, and managed to maintain the sleep position. But neither of them was the least bit sleepy. I was hatched after the time of newing. The newing? When is that? You see, the moon comes, and then the moon goes. And at the same time, the newing is when the moon is no thicker than one single thin downy feather. Well, that's the first glint of the new moon. Then, every day it grows thicker and fatter until there is a full shine, like now. And it might stay that way for 3 or 4 days. Then comes the time of the dwinkening. Instead of growing thicker and fatter, the moon dwinks and becomes thinner until once more it's no longer thicker than the thinnest strand of down. And then it disappears for a while. I've never saw this. At least I don't think I have. Oh, it was there, but you probably didn't really see because your family's nest was in the hollow of a great tree in a thick forest. But elf owls like myself, we live in deserts, not so many trees, and many of them are not very leafy. We can see the whole sky nearly all the time. My. And that is why they teach all of us elf owls about full shine. Although most owls sleep during the day, sometimes, especially after a hunting expedition, one might be tired and sleep at night. This can be very dangerous, especially if one sleeps out in the bald in the night. It confuses one's head. How? I'm not sure. My parents never really explained it, but they said it was the old owl Rockmore had gone crazy from too much full shine. Gilpy paused, then hesitating went on. They even said that he often did not know which was up and which was down, and that finally he died of a broken neck when he thought that he was lifting off from the top of a cactus. Gilpy's voice almost broke here. He thought he was flying towards the stars, and he slammed into the earth. That's what moon blinking is all about. You know longer what is for sure and what is not, what is truth and what are lies, what is real and what is false. That is being moon blinked. This is awful. Is this what's going to happen to us? Not if we can help it, Soren. What can we do? I'm not sure. Let me think a while. Meanwhile, try to cock your head just a bit so the moon does not shine straight down on it. And remember, when flying in full shine, there is no problem, but sleeping in it is disastrous. But I can't fly yet, Soren said softly. Well, just be sure you don't sleep. Soren cocked his head, and while doing so, tipped his beak down to look upon the little elf owl. How he wondered, was such a tiny creature so smart? He hoped with all of his might that Gilpy would come up with something, some idea. Just as he was thinking this, there was a sharp bark. 2-1, head straight, beak up. It was another sleep monitor. He felt a thwack on the side of his head. He did not fall asleep. And as soon as the patrolling owl left, they began whispering again. But then, all too soon, came the inevitable alarm for a sleep march to begin. And it would be 3 more circuits before they could meet again under the arch. Remember what I told you. Don't sleep. I'm so tired. How can I help it? Think of anything. What? Anything. Think of flying. Flying, yes. Thinking of flying would keep Soren awake. There was nothing more exciting, but in the meantime, all thoughts of flight were drowned out by the sound of his voice repeating his own name. Soren. Soren. There was also the sound of thousands of talons clicking on the hard stone surface as they marched in lines. Soren was between Hortense and a horned owl whose name blended into the drone of other names. 3 snowy owls were directly in front of him. They were perhaps 20 or more owls to each group, all arranged in loose lines, but they moved in unison as one block of owls, each owl endlessly repeating his or her name. It was impossible to sort out an individual name from the babel. And it was not long when on the fourth sleep march his own name began to sound odd to himself. With another 100 or so times of repeating it, it seemed almost as if not a name at all. It was merely a noise, and he too was becoming a meaningless creature with no real name, no family, maybe a friend. Finally, they stopped again, and it was in the silence of that moment, when they stopped, that Soren suddenly realized what was happening. It all made sense, particularly when he thought of what Gylfi had explained to him about moon blinking. This alone would keep him awake until he met up with her again. They are moon blinking us with our names, Gylfi. Soren gasped as he edged in closer to the little owl under the stone arch. Only the stars twinkled above. Gylfi understood immediately. A name endlessly repeated became a meaningless sound. It completely lost its individuality, its significance. It would just dissolve into nothingness. Soren continued, "Just move your beak and say your number, but don't say your name. That way it will stay your name." There would, however, be at least 3 more nights of full shine, and then the fullness would begin to lessen until the moon was completely dwindled. Gylfi looked at Soren in amazement. This ordinary barn owl was in his own way quite extraordinary. This was absolutely brilliant. Gylfi felt more than ever compelled to figure out a solution to sleeping exposed to full shine. Give me a second, I'll read one more chapter. Who all we got in here? We got Owl, we got Bree, and we have Jet, and that is okay. Owl is still sending tappy taps. Thank you, Owl. I think Bree and Jess fell asleep. I know you are, Owl, I know. I'm glad you're liking it. I really am. You'll get to be here for every story time. Oh, I know you are, Owl. Alright. Chapter 6. Separate Pits, One Mind. When Soren and Gylfi parted at the end of that long night, they looked at each other and blinked, trembling with fear. If only they could be together in the same pit. Then they could think together, talk, and plan. Gylfi had told Soren a little about her pit. She too had a pit guardian, who seemed very nice, at least compared to Jat and Jut, or Skinch. Gylfi's pit guardian was called Unk, short for uncle, and like Auntie, he tried to arrange special treats for Gylfi. A bit of a snake sometimes, often even calling Gylfi by her real name and not her number, 25-2. Indeed, when Gylfi had told Soren how her pit guardian had asked her to call him Unk, it was almost identical to the way in which Aunt Finny had insisted on Soren calling her Auntie. It was all so weird, Gylfi had said. I called him Sir at first, and then he said, Sir, all this formality. Really now, remember what I asked you all to call me. Uncle. I unanswered. Now I gave you my special name. The special name was Unk. The way in which Gylfi described Unk, drawing that name of endearment from her, well, Soren could just imagine the great horned owl dipping low to be on one eye level with the little elf, the huge tufts above the ears nearly scraping the ground. The pit guardians go out of their way to be nice to us, but it's still kind of scary, isn't it? Very, Gylfi replied. It was after I called him Unk that he gave me the bits of snake. I remember so well, as if it was yesterday, my first snake ceremony. Dad had saved the rattles for me and my sisters to play with. And you know what, Soren? It was as if Unk had read my mind, because I was thinking about my ceremony. And just then he says, I might even have some rattles for you to play with. And then I thanked him. I over-thanked him. It was disgusting, Soren. And Soren knew just what the little elf meant. But now they were separated, and Soren hoped desperately that Gylfi would come up with a solution. And Gylfi, once more stuffed with some extra snake bits that Unk had given her, had become very drowsy in her pit. Unk had even allowed her to sneak in some extra sleep. Another little treat. Or was it a bribe? But Gylfi could not sleep. She would be on the brink of sleep, drowsy with the succulent snake meat she had gorged on, but much too much for an owl of her size. But just as she was about to fall asleep, something would prick her dim consciousness. Some thought. Soren, in the pit next door, was concentrating as hard as he could. Think of something, Gylfi. Think of something. Auntie had been so nice when Soren returned to the stone pit. She said that she'd never seen a more tired-looking owl. Didn't sleep a wink, huh? I'm afraid not, Auntie. Now you hear me. Why don't you hop up there in that little stone niche? Just your size and out of prying eyes. Take yourself a little blink or two. You mean sleep? Sorry about the question. Of course, dear, I mean sleep. And don't apologize about a question. We'll get stricter with that later. But it's against the rules. We're supposed to be getting ready for our work assignments. Sometimes rules are made to be broken, little one. In my opinion, they should go much easier on you owlets after you first arrive. You're orphans for Glock's sake. It's still disturbing Soren deeply to be called an orphan. He had a mother and a father, a sister and a brother. He wasn't sure why, but there was something shameful about being called an orphan, especially when one wasn't. It was as if you were this disconnected, unloved creature. I know, Auntie continued. I'm just an old broody. What was a broody? Soren wondered, but he suppressed the urge to ask. Soren hopped up into the stone niche. My goodness, he thought. I did that rather well. I could have passed any branching test on that one. And then he became very, very sad when he thought that he had not even been able to begin his first branching lessons with his father. Sleep indeed was hard to come by, even a blink or two, because when Soren started to think about branching, he of course could not help but think about flying. And he remembered watching Clud's attempts finally his first very small flight, something pushed at the back of Soren's brain. A memory. Soren was not sure how long he had been sleeping, but it was not Auntie who woke him up. It was something else, something unspeakable. Once more he felt that terrible queasiness mixed with dread. It was as if his gizzard might burst. But the terrible truth settled like a stone inside him. Cludd pushed him. It came to him in a flash, so real that he could still feel the swift kick of Cludd's talons on his side, and then pitching over the edge of the hollow. His legs began to shake. Auntie was at his side. "Do you need the yarp, dear?" "Yes," Soren said weakly. He yarped a miserable little pellet. What did you expect? He had never even had his first bone ceremony, which was again made him remember all of Cludd's strutting about when he yarped his first pellet with bones. Would they have such things as first bone ceremonies here? They did everything so strangely. The number ceremony, for example, they called a ceremony. Ceremonies were supposed to make you feel special. A numbering ceremony hadn't made him feel anything. Auntie Finny was nice, but the others really weren't so nice at all. And this orphanage business? What was that all about? What was the real purpose of St. Agnes? Skinch, the Obla General, said, "When truth is found, purpose is revealed. No questions, just be humble." The only truth that Soren knew right now was a deep, gizzard-chilling one. His brother has shoved him from the nest. Think, Gylfi, thought Soren. Think of something. Another drink before the next chapter. Got 5 people in here now. How's everybody doing tonight? I'm glad y'all are enjoying the story. Alright. Chapter 7. The Great Scheme. Pretend to march, Soren. That is what we must do. It was just after the first rising shriek had been sounded by the brutish great-horned owl who perched on one of the outcroppings. Soren and Gylfi had met at the stone ledge for morning food. "What do you mean, pretend to march?" Soren blinked. Between the horrible truth about his brother and missing his parents, Soren could hardly hear what Gylfi was saying. His head was filled with the thoughts of his parents. It seemed as if every hour he found a new, more painful way to miss them. Once he did not get used to missing parents, he thought of never seeing his mom and dad again was the most unbearable thing he knew. And yet he could not stop thinking of them. He did not want to stop thinking of them. He would never stop thinking of them. Listen to me, Soren. It came to me first that the reason for the march is because of the shadows cast from the high cliffs into the Glossodium. And the arch is always in the shadows, right? Right. We are forced to march so that no one group of owls will spend too much time under these shadow shields against the moon's light. And I remembered what you said, how we must pretend to say our names, but instead we actually repeat our numbers. And then it was easy. We have to pretend to march, but never move. So we stay under the protection of the shadows. I suddenly remembered how my father, who was a great navigator, one of the best in the entire desert of Kunir, had tried to explain to me that stars and even the moon do not move in the way that seem too far from our view on Earth. Some stars, my father said, even appear to stand still in the sky, but in fact, they do move. Huh? Look, I know it's a little weird, but my dad explained that this was because of the great distance that disguises in stillness a star's motion. Even the moon, my father said, which is closer than many stars, is so distant that we cannot see the wobbles in its path as it glides through the night. So don't you see that if the motion is something as big as the moon can be disguised, well, couldn't the motion of something as small as us be disguised? A new light began to glimmer in Soren's eyes. Gylfi grew more excited. We can be like the stars, only in reverse. In other words, what would happen if we just stayed still and pretended to march? If we marched in place? What about the monitors, Soren asked. I've thought about that. The monitors always stand at the edge of the mass of marching owls. They don't really see what's going on in the middle. I saw a grass owl stumble last night. No one said, "Oh, sorry," or "Move it," or "You clumsy bird." All the owls simply parted and went around the grass owl. So what if we pretend to march and stay under the shadow of the arch each time? Get it? We would march in place and give the appearance of motion. It's a great scheme, Gylfi. We'll try it tonight. I can't wait. But I'm hungry now. This is it? Soren blinked as a large rusty-colored owl shoved one dead cricket toward him on the stone ledge. I mean, this is it, Soren quickly said, correcting what had been a question, as he stared down at what St. Aggies called breakfast. No mouse meat, no fat worms. Oh, for a hummingbird. But one cricket. This was ridiculous. He would starve. As the owlets stopped to eat, there was only one sound of their little beaks crunching the crickets. Soren couldn't believe that no one talked. Owlets always talked. His little sister Eglantine jabbered so much sometimes that his mom had to remind her to eat. Eat the feet on that bug, Eglantine. Eat the feet. You talk so much you're missing the very best part of the beetle. So the silence began to bother him, and there was indeed a terrible quiet to the stone canyons that made up St. Aggies. Always, of course, there was the hollow whistle of the wind and the endless clicking of talons on the hard rock surfaces. Other than that, there was not much sound. Instead, there was an overwhelming sense of being cut off, separated from Earth, or even from the sky. Soren began to realize that the entire lives of these little owls, if one could call it living, were carried out in these deep stone boxes in slots, the canyons and ravines of St. Agnes. There was a very little water, just a trickle here and there, into which they could dip their beaks for a drink. There were no leaves, no moss, no grasses that he could see, none of the soft things that wrapped the world and made it tender and springy. It was a stone forest with its jagged outcroppings, rock needles, and spires and ledges. They had almost finished eating, so there was not even the clicking, just the sound of crickets being crunched. An owl next to him muttered, "I'd love a piece of rat snake." Oh, Soren sighed and thought, Miss Plithifer. His family avoided serving snake out of respect for Miss Plithifer. Miss Plithifer said it was nonsense. "Show me a rat snake or a bull snake that anyone really loved," she would say. "Don't worry about my feelings. I have no feelings towards such a snake." But still his parents avoided such foods. Soren's father called it special sensitivity. Soren had no idea what it meant, except he didn't want to hurt Miss Plithifer's feelings, and he just said she had none. Soren, of course, didn't really believe this. He thought Miss Plithifer had plenty of feelings. She was a most lovable creature, and his heart beat a little harder when he remembered her calling down to him from the hollow high. It almost made him cry to remember her voice. What had happened to her that night? Had Clud done something to her as well? Or had she gotten away to get help? Did she miss him? Did his parents miss him? Once more, there was that sharp pain of missing that Soren nearly staggered with the very idea of never seeing his parents again. Then he thought of Clud and began to tremble all over again. "Are you all right?" Gylfi asked. She was so small that she barely reached up to Soren's wingtips. "No, I'm not all right. Nothing is right. Don't you miss your parents? Don't you wonder what they think happened to you?" "Yes, Soren, yes. I can't think about it." "Listen, pull yourself together. We have our great scheme, remember?" "What do you mean, pull yourself together? Do you know what I just figured out about my brother?" "Look, we don't have much time," Gylfi said quickly. "Make sure you get assigned to the Pelatorium." "The Pelatorium?" Chapter 8. The Pelatorium. A drink and then I will start reading again. Chaos, welcome in. How are you? Welcome to Bedtime Stories with KJ. I am 7 chapters into a book, starting on 8. Seven, 9, awesome. Hang on, Owl, I'll tell you. There are 27 in this one. Probably won't be reading the whole book tonight. Chapter 8. The Pelatorium. Auntie Finny suddenly appeared. "Cricket Hunter, you're perfect, you see. Here in our lovely stone country, the cricket season is much longer. They hide in shine to bask in the heat of the day. Ow. Soren started to speak. I'm feeling a little peckish. You know, Auntie, I think maybe the Pelotorium would be better for me tonight. Oh, the Pelotorium. Auntie looked slightly confused. She had never had an owlet suggest another workstation or training schedule. She looked at the barn owl. He didn't look well, but if he failed as a cricket hunter, it would reflect poorly on her. And then again, if she fulfilled this owl's request, it would perhaps put him in her debt. And it was always good to have an owlet indebted to you. Yes, I suppose so. She gazed at the young owl. Soren felt the soft yellow glow of her eyes. Now remember, dear, what I've done for you, and remember the little. She beaked the word. Nap, I allowed you. The yellow light turned a bit hard like glinting gold. Then follow that line over there into the Pelotorium. I am 42-7. To be your guide for the Pelotorium, follow me. The owlet spoke in a peculiar manner. Her words were clipped and hollow. It was not like the terrible thrum and clang of Jat and Jut, but it was like no owl sound Soren had ever heard. Soren and Gylfi followed number 47-2, who had begun to march. Soon they heard the click of all the owlet's talons as they struck the ground, for they were once more marching in time. Now the strange hollow tone in which 47-2 had spoken seemed to hover over the vast marching assembly of owls. They were singing. Every pellet has a story all its own. Every pellet has a story all its own. With its fur and teeth and bones, and one or two tiny stones. Every pellet has a story all its own. We shall dissect every pellet with glee. Perhaps we'll find a rodent's knee, and never shall we tire in the sacred task that we conspire, nor do our work less than perfectly. And those bright flecks at the core, which make our hearts soar, shall forever remain our deepest mystery. Nothing could have prepared Soren and Gylfi for the shock of what met their eyes as they entered the Pelotorium. They had been led into another box canyon, and on slabs of rocks, hundreds of owls bobbed their heads up and down over thousands of pellets that had been yarked by owls earlier. If ever one of these little two owlets had known the meaning of the word hell, they would have known that this was certainly the deepest and worst part of it. But neither Soren nor Gylfi, in their own short lives, knew of such things as hell, or in the words that would describe such a place. Until their snatching, they really had only known what might be called as heaven. Life high in a lovely tree hollow, or cactus lined with the downy fluff of their parents. Plump insects delivered several times a day, and then the first juicy mouse morsels. And besides all the delicious meals, that there were stories of flight, of learning to fly, or of the feeling that must be deep in their gizzards in order to rise on the wind. Number 47-2 stepped up to them. In their wildly hollow voice, she began to speak. I am what is called a third-degree picker. I pick through the pellets for the larger objects, pebbles, bone, and teeth mostly. Second-degree pickers pick for feathers and fur. First-degree pickers pick for flecks. This is a fleck. 47-2 pointed with her talon to the tiniest speck that was glinting in an open pellet. It was kind of metal. She paused. Or something, she added vaguely. You need not know what they are. You need only know that flecks are precious, more precious than gold. Where was that? To become a fleck picker is the highest level of skill in the pelletorium. Tomorrow I shall be advanced, level 1. I shall be a second-degree picker. Therefore, as the most advanced third-degree picker, it is my task to instruct you. And then the owlet blinked. She began humming the dreadful song. It is best, when beginning as a picker, to use your beak. Your talons can be used to steady your pellet. Each object you'll find is to be lined up neatly on the stone ledge. Your work area. Failure to line up objects neatly is a most serious offense. Offenders are severely punished, as shall be demonstrated during our laughter therapy lessons. Soren and Gylfi had no idea what this owlet was talking about. Laughter therapy? Do your work diligently, and you too may be advanced someday. The owlet then stepped up to the ledge, which was covered with pellets, and bent over. Proceed. It is strictly forbidden to use your own pellets in this work. 47-2 glared at Soren. The owlet bent over speckled head and began to pick. Soren felt a gagging sensation and yarped another pellet. Soren and Gylfi had no idea how long they had been working. It seemed endless. It was not entirely quiet. However, at certain intervals, a low, soft whistle alarm would be sounded from one of the smaller owls who monitored the work from overhead ledges, and the sound of another pellet song would begin to rise. The songs were sung in the same hollow tones in which 47-2 had spoken, but Soren felt that there was sung mostly to provide a rhythm for their work. The words, he supposed, like their own non-number names, had become meaningless. In between the songs, it was not completely silent. They were, of course, certain commands that had to be given. New pellets needed in Area 10B, or Area 20C needs to pick up the pace. And then there was some talk among the owls as they worked. But the more carefully Soren and Gylfi listened, the stranger this talk seemed. And then suddenly an owlet working on the same ledge as Soren began to speak. 12-1, I feel perfect this morning. I have just completed my first set of pellets. I am sure you shall feel perfect too. When you have completed your first set, it is a feeling of rare contentment to complete a set. I feel this sense of rare contentment every morning at this hour. Rare, Soren thought. This was a word he knew, for his parents had told him that the family of barn owls to which they belonged, the Tyto alba, had become rare, which meant there were not many of them left. So how could this owlet's contentment be rare if it happened every morning at this particular hour? I too feel perfect, another owl spoke, turning towards Gilfy this time. It was nearly the same speech. At regular intervals now, the two owls turned alternately to Soren and Gilfy, and gave short little reports on their states of contentment. On occasion, these reports became interspersed with comments. 25-2, for an owlet of your exceedingly tiny stature, you have a fine posture as you peck. Thank you, Gilfy replied, and dipped her head in what she thought was a docile manner. You are most welcome, 25-2. Then the owlet closest to Soren began. 12-1, your beak work is quite advanced. You work with industry and delicacy. Thank you, said Soren. And then for some reason he added, thank you very much. Oh, you are very welcome, but you need not be excessively polite. It wastes energy, politely in its own reward, just like flex. What are the flex? The question slipped out, but many of the pellet songs referred to flex, and Soren could not understand for the life of him what they were. He understood the feathers and bones, the teeth being found in the pellets. But what were these mysterious flecks? The two owlets gave small piercing shrieks that contrasted sharply with their unusual tones. Question alarm! Question alarm! Two ferocious, darkly feathered owls, their glaring yellow eyes framed above the dark red eye tufts, swooped down and plucked up Soren. How could you, Soren? Gilfy nearly cried out, but luckily the question died on her beak. Soren felt as if his gizzard were dropping to his talons, as the two owls soared with him dangling between them. They were transporting him in a most painful manner. Each one held a wing in his talons, and it was as if they were being torn in half. As they spiraled upward into the pelletorium, Soren felt beneath him not the cushion of captured air, but of which his father had often spoken, but instead a surge of noisy vibrations that seemed to pummel him from below. They are laughing at you, 12-1. They are laughing so hard the air tossed with their chuckles, said one of the owls. You, 12-1, the other owl was speaking now. You are our first object of the day for laughing therapy. Soren remained mute. No matter how many questions might batter his brain, his imagination, or dance on the tip of his beak, he would never ask them again. The two owls had now aligned with him on a very high ledge that was visible to the entire pelletorium below. The laughter of the owlets and the scores of the monitors and guards ricocheted off the stone walls. It filled Soren's head with a terrible clatter. He thought he would go yokes right there and start screaming. And now for the best moment of all in laughter therapy. There was a shrill screech. The air stirred, and Skinch, the Obla General, landed next to Soren. And then Skinch's second-in-command, Lieutenant Sporn, arrived, his eyes darting in an amber glee. Oh, great Glocks, thought Soren, what now? Yes, story time. It is bedtime stories with KJ. Thank you for the tappy tap owl. We are reading a series about owls. Let's see here. We'll do one more chapter, and then I will be ending for the night. Chapter 9. Good Nurse Finny. Oh, 12-1. Oh my goodness, look at you. Soren groaned and blinked. What happened? Soren asked. His eyes fluttered open, and he felt himself basking in the tender yellow light of Auntie Finny's eyes. Now, dear. Questions are what got you in this trouble in the first place. We'll have to be a little stricter now. All you need to know is that you were naughty, and now you're back with me in the stone pit. A soft babble of soothing hoots steamed from Auntie's beak, but one question after another pounded inside Soren's head. He nearly had to clamp his beak shut not to ask them. He must have fainted at some point during the laughter therapy session. He was trying to reconstruct what had happened in his head. There had been the question alarm, the two ferocious beaks, the laughter. Oh, the laughter had been terrible. But why were his wings hurting so much? This time the question simply withered in his mind. Not because he was too frightened to ask, but because he had turned his head and seen his wings. There. Great gloss, he muttered, and promptly fell over once more in a faint. Not now, Auntie Finny was clicking her beak. I'm not going to take care of that. You'll feel better in no time. You don't need those silly little feathers. I don't need my feathers? It was not a question. Was this owl totally yokes? Don't need my feathers? He was about to ask how would he ever fly, but he clamped his beak shut tight. Auntie was now crushing something in her beak. She gave a yarp-like hiccup and had a pulpy wad of soggy moss flew from her beak directly onto Soren's wing. It felt good, and Soren sighed. Nice feeling, yes it is. Nothing like this stone moss for curing what ails you. Now you can call me Nursey. Nursey? And then Soren corrected himself. Oh, Nursey. You're learning, dear. You're learning fast. Sometimes we do have to be a little stricter. But I bet you've learned your lesson, and you'll never get plucked again. Plucked? Soren gasped. They had actually plucked him. That wasn't an accident? I know what you're thinking. I really don't approve. But you know I have very little say. I can only do my best for each and every little owlet in my pit. I try. She almost whimpered. But Auntie or Nursey didn't know what Soren was thinking. Not at all. She looked at him kindly. She asked no questions, of course. But Soren felt compelled to say, Auntie, Nursey. Name seemed awfully important to this old snowy owl. Very carefully he was going to try to explain his thoughts without asking questions. Oh, he had indeed learned his lesson. I do not understand. Nursey, why are you so nice here in the stone pit? And they are so awful. The owls in the Glossidium and the Pelatorium, they are mean for no good reason. Ah, but there is a reason. There's a reason? Soren's words were flat and carried no effect of a question. This was indeed possible. You see, Nursey Finney continued, it builds character. It builds character, repeated the same even tone. Though carefully meted out, punishment and self-denial, you shall be made hardly. Nursey spoke in a sing-songy voice, as if she had said these words many times. Destroying wings builds character, I see. Soren tried to sound logical and keep any hint of the incredulous out of his voice. Oh yes, you do see. I am so pleased. And to think, I always thought flight was a natural part of an owl's character. Silly me. He was getting awfully good at this. Oh, you're a bright little thing, Nursey hooted. You're catching on. Yes, flight is to be earned if one is designed for flight at all. Yes, of course, Soren said, trying desperately to keep the reasonable tone in his voice. But inside his gizzard was twitching madly. His heart was beating rapidly, and a dark panic began to fill him. Oh, and here comes 12-8, a fine example of a DNF. Soren stared at each of the incomprehension. DNF, dear. It means destined not to fly. 12-8 is one, and a nursey in a training too. Who was number 12-8? Soren sorted through all of the numbers in his mind. The number sounded familiar, and then Soren saw the little spotted owl named Hortense, who was so happy to receive her number designation because she hated her name. She was hopping about nearby. Come here, 12-8. Your first nursing lesson. Hortense, or number 12-8, had an even blanker look than before in her eyes. Oh, a patient. Show me how to make the moss pulp. Finney began to show the little owl how to beat the moss until it was soft and squishy. Soren had to admit he didn't mind the attention to his wings. They indeed were feeling much better. He observed 12-8 carefully as she applied the moss compresses. She wondered why she was not designed for flight. He carefully tried to figure out how to get the answer without asking a question. I saw you, I think, in the pelotorium this morning. Oh, no, not me. I'm strictly a broody. A broody? Only silence followed. A broody. Soren repeated again, still silence. It must be nice to be a broody, to work in the broodorium. Soren just made up the word. It's not called the broodorium. 12-8 spoke in the perfect hollow tones of a truly moon-blinked owl. Oh, it isn't? Soren said flatly. Yes, how stupid of me. It's that other word. Slips my mind right now. No, it doesn't slip your mind. You just don't know. No one knows. 12-8's voice turned brittle. It's top secret. Top secret? Top secret. I've got clearance. The little owl swelled up now with pride. Flight clearance. Absolutely not. That is stupid. I couldn't have top secret clearance if I had flight clearance. But don't you want to fly? Soren was ready to scream the question. Just then Finney returned. Ah, 12-8. You are doing a splendid job. What a little nurse you'll make someday. My wings do feel a lot better, Soren said sweetly, and marveled how deceptive he was quickly becoming. Oh yes, his wings did feel better, but Soren had another idea, another question he wanted to throw out under the guise of a statement. I'll tell you the thing that always really perks me up and makes me feel just fine in the gizzard. Oh, that's what we want, my dear, Finny cooed. Story. My favorite stories are the legends of Ga'Hoole. Yes, the Gahulian cycle, I think they are called. A strange sound halfway between a yarp and the screech of a screech owl issued from Auntie Finny's beak, and she crumbled into a dead faint. Oh my goodness! I don't know what you said, 12-1, but I've got to nurse the nursey now. The little spotted owl trotted off to find a remedy. I know what I said, Soren whispered to himself. I said the legends of Ga'Hoole. Finch, Gilfie, Soren, Twilight Desert. Okay. Alright, guys. Hello, Liz. How are you? You came in just as I was finishing for the night. Yes, I will be starting Chapter 10 tomorrow, Owl. I promise. I will read for a couple more hours as well tomorrow night. I will start Chapter 10 and probably go to, I don't know, 21, 22, somewhere around in there. Oh, it's all good. It's all good. I starting to read a series that one of my good friends right here, Sativa Owl, she really likes owls, and I just so happen to have a series of Guardians of Ga'Hoole. But I love you all. You all have a great night. I hope y'all all have sweet dreams. Y'all be good. See y'all tomorrow. Love you.